And now it's going to be my great pleasure to bring you on an in-depth tour of the Royal Ontario Museum, which presents the entire span of human history. Let me just give you a quick preview of the museum. We'll take the elevator up to the third floor for starters. And the third floor is the culture history. So there we have ancient Egypt and Syria, Mesopotamia, Greece and Rome. There's statues, there's artifacts, there's some gold jewelry. And it's a very impressive collection. And it's all on that one floor. So it's really quite easy to see it. And then the second floor is natural history. So there you've got some animals and stuffed animals, dioramas, different invertebrates displays. Maybe there's some dinosaurs, things like this. And then on this ground floor, we have a variety. There's some Asian, there's Chinese, some Korean. So what I thought is that we'd at least stay together, at least at the beginning, particularly on the top floor. And there I have a few things to say about Egypt and Greece and Rome. And now let's take a quick trip through human history. So now we have a display case on the origins of farming. And from Mesopotamia, there is the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. And that's probably the first place on the planet that plants and animals were domesticated. And all of a sudden you have a settled way of life. You've got a lot of pottery for storing and cooking the foods, and these special kinds of implements for harvesting the grain. And with the farming, you have the origins of the cities and the city-states. And in Mesopotamia, you have places like Ur, which is the earliest settled city-state in archaeological history. And they have a nice display of Etruscan artifacts. This was the culture that preceded the Roman culture. So the Etruscans' headquarters was in Tuscany, where Florence is today. But this is a little display of what the Etruscans accomplished. And then we'll move into the main room, which has a nice collection of Greek statues and Roman pieces. We're into the Roman era. And on the wall, there's a couple of interesting displays showing the trade routes. Some of them were by boat over the sea. In fact, there's a lot of sunken Roman ships still waiting to be found on the bottom of the Mediterranean. It's been estimated there's 10,000 Roman ships that are still down there. Most of the bronze statues that we have today in museums came from shipwrecks. And you can see that there was a lot of sea trade routes. But even more importantly, there was the Roman road network. They had thousands of miles of roads. And they would bring along their donkey carts and their soldiers. And this is how they controlled the empire and had all of the goods, and all of the roads lead to Rome. There it is. You can see it. They all lead to Rome. This is Roman Britain. So we have influence of Rome all the way. Imagine Rome had conquered as much as what are today about 40 different European countries, all the way up to Britain and Hadrian's Wall by Scotland, and as far south as Egypt. So in these two cases, we have the two extremes of the Roman Empire, Britain and all the way down through Egypt. Roman period gladiators, 2nd century AD, probably Asia Minor. Roman gladiator helmet, 2nd century AD. Septimius Severus, now 193 to 211. So this gallery is all the Greek from the classical period and the Hellenistic period. So that time period was around 500 BC up through about 200 BC. And you have these very realistic kinds of portraits. And over here, this is even more elaborate. This would be from the Hellenistic style, from the time of Alexander the Great, when he had his influence. So we have in this one room a very nice span of classical Greek prehistory, including the armor. Check this one out here. This is great. There's a helmet. This is from the Battle of Marathon, which was 490 BC. And they found this skull inside the helmet. And they found it on the battlefield of Marathon. So there's one of the victims, one of the losers of the Battle of Marathon. Oh, yeah. And all these other helmets to remind us that Greece was a very important military power. That's how you became an important trading power, to back it up with the military, with an army and a navy. Constantly at war, the city-states, Athens and Sparta, and the Peloponnesian Wars. This here is Dionysus. Notice this resemblance? Dennis means Dionysus. It's the same name. The god of partying and wine and merriment. That fits, right?
Bacchus, huh?
Bacchus, right. God of the grapes. And then we venture into their major collection of artifacts from Egypt. So here's a beautiful black basalt obelisk. That's one of the many things that Egyptians are famous for, is the obelisk. Now these are all original pieces in here. Now if you just come on over this way, get a quick look at the map to get oriented. We have what is today Cairo, would be up in this area. Cairo was not important in the ancient Egyptian days. There was other nearby towns of Memphis and Saqqara and Giza that came into importance a little bit towards the middle of Egyptian history. But earlier on, Thebes and Luxor were the real important spots. This is where Ramses II built the great temple of Karnak, and other pharaohs contributed to that temple as well. So you have the Nile Valley, which was that fertile strip that ran through the whole country and supported this amazing culture. The Nile was the mother of Egypt. When we visit Egypt, we stay in Cairo a few days, and we go out to Saqqara and Giza and see the pyramids, of course. And then we fly down. The typical way you visit is you fly down to Thebes, which is Luxor, and you get on the boat, and then you cruise along the Nile for 4 days. Past some temples, there's Kamambo. You go down to Philae, down by Aswan, see the Aswan Dam. And the Valley of the Kings and Queens is over here by Luxor. And there's a lot of temples to see along the way. This Egyptian culture is so interesting because of the Nile and the pyramids, and they're a distinctive form of art. So in here we have some good examples of their art. The Egyptians put these into the tombs. A lot of what you'll see here today are burial goods to help the departed along on its way into the afterlife. And it gives you a good idea of what the culture was like, how they farmed, how they made their bread, how they made their beer, because it's all depicted for us in these models. And the bakers, you see they're rolling the dough, baking the bread, all very realistic. The collection gives you quite an insight into the daily life of the ancient commoners as well as the aristocracy from Egypt, including a big display of their burial practices. So here we've got a sarcophagus, and it's like a casket, and it's all painted with different hieroglyphics and different symbols, and inside is the mummy. So this is very much a companion piece that goes together. And all of these symbols were magical kinds of religious statements to help the body into the afterlife and into its eternal life beyond. The Egyptians were extremely religious people. Almost everything they did during real life was oriented towards the afterlife. And especially when it came to death itself, they were very elaborate. And so the mummy is inside the sarcophagus, and that would be in a stone tomb. And the stone tomb casket would then be in some sort of a burial spot, either in the ground or in a cave in a hill, or later on, of course, in the pyramids if you were a big pharaoh. That was reserved for the biggest of the pharaohs. But any one of the high officials or wealthy people of Egypt would be treated like this in the afterlife. The poor people, not so much. They would just be buried, maybe not even mummified. The mummification process involved cutting the body open and removing the organs and putting them here, putting the organs into the canopic jars. And then once the organs were out of the body itself was dried with salts and special kinds of herbal treatments, and dried in the sun as well. And gauze bandages would be changed to really desiccate and dry out the body and preserve it, and then wrapped in gauze and buried away. This is the temple of Philae, and it shows you the layout of a typical Egyptian temple from about 300 BC. This is typical of the Greek period, and you have the pylons, and you have the inner sanctum of the temple here. So you approach it from the water. This is in the Nile, on an island in the middle of the Nile River. This was the southern extent of the Roman Empire. We're down the Nile near the Aswan Dam at this point. In fact, the Aswan Dam construction flooded this temple, and they had to rebuild it. They took apart every single stone and they rebuilt it on a higher island. You know, Egypt was conquered by a whole variety of foreign invaders from from almost 700 BC. The Syrians came in, the Hittites came in, one conquest after another. Alexander conquered Egypt for the Greeks about 300 BC, and the Ptolemy dynasty was set up, which was actually a series of Greek rulers. And then finally, the Romans had their time about 50 AD with Octavian and Caesar Augustus. And here we have some examples of the influence of the Romans in Egypt. And of course, all along, Egypt was influencing each of these cultures in turn. In this case, it's Coptic Egypt, which means the Christian period in Egypt. So that's after the year 200. You see this Islamic sorts of arches here. It's like a souk into Byzantium, say into like Istanbul in the Middle East. What does the Byzantine culture mean? Well, it's from Byzantium because there was the Roman Empire that split into two, the Western Empire and the Eastern Empire. This is about the year 400 AD. And the Eastern Empire was headquartered in Byzantium, which is today Istanbul, or Constantinople, as they named it. The Emperor Constantine set it up. The Byzantine evolved into the Gothic, actually, too. And so you have some Romanesque structures that are Byzantine in style, and then that evolved into the Gothic style of architecture, and then from there, eventually into the Renaissance. The building is so huge, it's actually two buildings. This wing is small, and it has two meanders to go through. There's one over here that's Gothic, and it'll take you up through certain periods of Western art history with some furniture, clothing, interior utensils and things like that. And it's really fun to walk through on that side. And over here you can see there's some armaments. So it's a real simple walkthrough. Let's just walk on through there and then walk on through here, and we'll end up back. There's this evolution of style we're going to walk through, the Gothic and the Renaissance, the Baroque, and then right up through the Neoclassical and into the 19th century. All in one little stroll through time. Starting with, like, here's the Gothic. The Middle Ages. So we're talking about the 13th century. These would have been from churches. Of course, the art in those days was mostly all religious. And then right away we're into the Renaissance. Ceramics. From the school of Della Robbia in Florence. And more of this style of Della Robbia from Florence. Some simple interior furnishings. This is from the early 1700s. And if you'll notice the chronology of the items we've been presenting, it takes you through the entire span of human history. We started back with the earliest Mesopotamians, and then on to the Egyptians and the Greeks, and so on through the Renaissance. And now already we're up to 1760 through 1780 with the interior of a noble family's home. And then on to the Regency period, which was from 1810 through 1830 in England. And then it moves along as you walk through the corridors of display cases to early modern, turn of the century, middle-class households furnishings, and then into the Art Nouveau, especially as found in Vienna from 1898 through about 1920. A really breathtaking display. And then, if you haven't seen enough, there's Chinese collections. This is the largest collection of Chinese artifacts in all of North America. Mostly ceramics. There's also wooden structures. There's stone sculptures. And this is like the terracotta army from Xi'an, but in miniature. All of the soldiers, each one different, nicely arranged in a parade formation as they were found in their original site. Not only is this Royal Ontario Museum filled with cultural artifacts, but they have a vast display on natural history. An entire floor is devoted to animals and displays with dioramas We have stuffed animals, we have birds, we have fish, there's skeletons on display, the birds of North America, and very dynamic presentations too. This museum is very much state-of-the-art, very up-to-date with these environments, similar to what you would find in New York at the American Museum of Natural History or in Washington, D.C. at the Smithsonian. And they have got a marvelous dinosaur gallery. Look at the lighting and the ferns and this jungle lifelike environment that they have created to go with these great skeletons of the dinosaurs. Always a fascination for small kids as well as for adults to enjoy. It continues the deep span of history as presented at the museum. They don't leave anything out. Also show you archaeologists at work. And this little girl doesn't need any help from Grandma. She can do it herself. Yeah, the kids can get hands-on in various exhibits in the children's wing of the museum. It's the Discovery Gallery, and it's really lots of fun for the little ones to get involved in an educational and entertaining way with the collections. And to complete the historic displays on the ground floor, you'll find a very interesting exhibit of the native people of Canada. The first Americans in their costumes, their outfits, their daily life, reconstructed in the display cases. It's a very modern and huge museum. You don't want to miss the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto, the largest museum in Canada. Just a few blocks away is the Art Gallery of Ontario. This is devoted to the fine arts. Paintings and sculpture. There's a large Henry Moore out front, and inside there's 20 Henry Moores, including this one towering over the lobby. They have got an excellent gift shop here as well, bookstore, and all kinds of little goodies that you can buy for yourself and your friends. And you don't have to pay any admission to the museum, of course, to go into the gift shop. Naturally, this is a moneymaker for the museum, so they want to encourage you to come on in and look through their posters and their stationaries and their different kinds of artifacts and copies of some of the paintings on display inside the museum. Wonderful Henry Moore outside.